Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel, and welcome to a gaming video. In today's video, I want to recap a franchise that I fell in love with over 10 years ago now, actually, Destiny. Destiny 2 is coming to an end on June 9th when you're seeing this video, and with the end of Destiny, I've been thinking a lot back to why I love this franchise so much. I attribute Destiny to my love of space and adventure in general. It is one of the few games that I have been genuinely hooked onto since its release all the way in 2014, and now it is time. I want to rank every single Destiny campaign from the worst to the best. Basically saying I want to rank the DLCs. I have a weird gimmick system for this that I'm going to go into detail before we get started. I just feel like it's a little hard to rank some of these considering most of them aren't even playable anymore. So a lot of this is based on memory, but I'm going to do my best to make this very fair in the way that I rank it. Basically, I'm focusing strictly on the narrative and the gameplay around the narrative game. So, we're focusing on campaign missions, the loot that you acquire through the campaign missions, how fun the campaign missions are to play through, how important the story of that campaign is to the overarching narrative of Destiny, stuff like that. It's very hard to rank individual raids considering that I was never a big raid player, so a lot of the older raids I've never even gotten my hands on and have been completely removed from the game in Destiny 2's case. And on top of that, it would feel very unfair to rank the loot based on simply just how good the weapons were, considering that Destiny changes over time and those weapons are pretty useless now. So instead, in the loot category, I'm going to be considering that like exotics and how important those exotics were moving forward with the time, as well as just how general the loot economy was during that period. So let's get into our actual ranking categories. Yes, I'm using categories instead of just ranking them worst to best. So we have 5 categories for every single DLC, starting off with story and narrative. This is going to be its overall impact in the Destiny universe. If it has a good story and a good narrative, it will get a 10. If it has a bad one, it will get a 1, somewhere in between. That's kind of how the ranking system works here. Our second category is going to be gameplay. This is how generally fun it is to explore and play in this world during this particular portion of Destiny's history. For example, in the Curse of Osiris DLC, this includes how fun it is to do public events on Mercury, or in Shadowkeep's case, how fun it is to do public events on the Moon, stuff like that. In terms of the gimmick for the next category, this is going to be what the DLC adds in, that is the new addition to the story. For example, in the Destiny 2 Warmind expansion, you have the addition of the Rasputin spears that you can use in combat, whereas in Shadowkeep you wear Dreambane armor to go into certain missions with different gear and loadouts. And the last category that I loosely touched on a minute ago is loot. In the loot category, it is very, very hard to categorize things by their loot, but this is mostly just how important the exotic weapons, or the weapons from that particular era, are to the overall impact of Destiny. I know it sounds a little bit biased and a little bit unfair, but this is just a really hard thing to rank with DLCs that are not even in the game anymore, so I figured this would be kind of the best way to balance out the scales. And with all of that being said, there are 16 DLC campaigns in Destiny history, and we're going to rank all 16 of them from the worst to the best. Coming in at number 16 is going to be the Curse of Osiris. Starting off with the story and narrative, I'm going to give this one a 1 out of 10. The overall narrative of the Curse of Osiris DLC is relatively useless to the overarching narrative of Destiny. If Curse of Osiris would have taken place around the era of the original Destiny campaign, I could see it being a little bit more beneficial considering that it's about the Vex having a very powerful mind, but for the most part, you're basically just wandering through endless loops and hallways within the extra dimension that you find on Mercury. You're helping Osiris escape from the infinite location I'm struggling the name of, but the Infinite Garden, or whatever it's called, and throughout the course of the campaign, you're basically just turning Osiris into a main character beyond any other real character development for the Guardian, any other characters in the campaign, or just really any of the world building of Destiny. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 10. I think the main reason it gets a big gameplay boost is simply because Destiny 2's gameplay was already pretty fun by the time Curse of Osiris came about. I've always been a fan of early Destiny 2, even though a lot of people hated it because it was just more of Destiny 1 without any of your loot, but I enjoyed early Destiny 2, and I generally think the gameplay of it is what somewhat saves Curse of Osiris. As for this one's gimmick, I'm going to give this one a 2 out of 10 because there isn't really a gimmick with Curse of Osiris. I mean, sure, the infinitely generating world is a pretty cool looking thing after you go through the Mercury portal, but for the most part there isn't really a gimmick to latch onto with the Curse of Osiris DLC. And lastly, for the loot, I'm going to give this one a 1 out of 10. This generated like the most iconic Destiny clip of all time, the 2 tokens in a blue clip, so I'm going to give this one a 1 out of 10 for loot. And that leads us to an overall score of a 9, which puts it in the D tier.
I promised before that this was the most rewarding public event, and there we have it. We have 2 chests for a change, and check out those sweet, sweet moves.
Yeah.
After that is going to be the House of Wolves campaign at number 15. This is the second expansion from Destiny 1. In story and narrative, I'm going to give this one a 3. I think it's interesting getting to see the evolution of the Reef and the importance of Petra and Varix in the world. But overall, the Awoken don't have any super relevance to the narrative, especially considering what happened to them at the beginning of The Taken King. So there isn't a lot going on narratively that keeps this story super interesting in the House of Wolves expansion. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. Destiny 1 early gameplay, especially with its 2 bonus expansions that are basically just continuations of the previous campaign, the base game campaign, don't really have any gameplay changes from the original Destiny campaign. And it's kind of unfortunate because Destiny's original campaign isn't really all that good, so when you give it expansions that are also just the same gameplay loop with slightly different enemy design, it doesn't really change anything gameplay-wise. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. Once again, there isn't really a gimmick with the House of Wolves DLC. There's nothing really particularly interesting, so the gimmick here is kind of just you're playing Destiny 2, or you're playing Destiny 1. And lastly, I'm going to give the loot a 5 out of 10. I think this is just basic Destiny loot. I consider a 5 out of 10 just perfectly right in the middle, and this is just more basic Destiny loot. Of course, you do have things like the Prison of Elders that can give you slightly better loot, but for the most part, I don't think this is anything in particularly special to the Destiny universe in terms of its loot. It is just a continuation of that original game, which gives the House of Wolves an overall score of 13 points. Coming in at number 14 is going to be the Dark Below, the first expansion from Destiny 1. This story and narrative, I'm going to give a 4 out of 10. It is an upgrade from the House of Wolves. I do enjoy getting to explore the moon, uncover Hive secrets, and take down Crota's heart, or his soul in the crystal. There is some other good stuff that you do get in this, just deepening your understanding of the Hive lore. So there is a lot of interesting stuff, but I think for the overall Destiny narrative, the only thing that's really relevant is just the death of Crota in the raid. So if you kind of take that out of the equation, which I know that is a very important thing, but if you take that out of the equation, the whole overarching narrative of the Dark Below campaign is pretty void for the most part. As for the gameplay, I'm going to once again give this a 4 out of 10. It is basically just the same thing as the House of Wolves. There's less missions than the base game campaign. There is less enemies to fight. There is less game to play. So I think it is a little bit worse than the main game's campaign, and it's pretty much on par in terms of gameplay with House of Wolves. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give this one a boost with a 3 out of 10. You do have actually a bit of a gimmick with the Hive magic being very different than you would expect from the base game. Here you have moments where you get trapped in dark areas where you have to use your flashlight. You encounter the Hive more often, so you're getting to see all of their different magic powers, and just generally things like that. I think this is a little bit more gimmicky. Plus, you have the addition of relic swords that you can pick up off of the Hive, which I think counts towards the gimmick score. And lastly, we have the loot category, which once again, I'm just going to give a 5 out of 10. It's pretty generic Destiny 1 loot. It's not anything in particular amazing. Now that you look at things like modern Destiny 2 with how packed the loot pool is, I feel like this is just general loot, which totals out the Dark Below to 16 points. At number 13 is going to be the original Destiny campaign. Now, I love the original Destiny campaign, but I do have to admit it is one of the lower rated in terms of its general gameplay and its flow. As for the story and narrative, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. I think it is generally not that important to the story. It kind of just introduces you to every faction of enemies. You start off with the Fallen, you eventually run into Cabal, Vex, Hive. you run into all of these different races of enemies, and there isn't really a through line. Like, of course, you go to these different planets to get an item so that you can go eventually to the Black Garden to defeat the Vex Heart, but for the most part, it doesn't really have any narrative implications beyond just stopping the Vex from doing something, so there isn't really anything important going on here. It's a pretty generic narrative for most things considered. You meet a stranger character who guides you on a journey, you manage to stop a demigod, and that's kind of just it. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. The original Destiny gameplay is pretty basic, pretty standard. Destiny 1, of course, definitely evolved with its two major DLCs, so I would consider this just basic Destiny gameplay. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give this a 2 out of 10 because the gimmick is kind of just you're playing the game. There isn't necessarily a gimmick. Like, obviously, if you want to consider having supers and light powers and stuff like that, the gimmick, then this would be a lot higher. But for the most part, I'm not considering that a gimmick. That's just part of the game. So I'm going to give it a 2 out of 10. And as for the loot, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. Once again, just very generic Destiny loot. There's not anything in particular amazing with the loot in the early Destiny years. So I'm going to give this one a 17-point average. After that is going to be Shadowkeep at number 12. This is the lowest rated Destiny 2 major DLC. I'm going to give Shadowkeep a 6 out of 10 in the narrative. Basically, all that happens in this story is that Eris Morn introduces us to the darkness and we get the first glimpse of the Witness. The raid doesn't have any particularly major implications for the story. You just kind of defeat a disciple and then later they come back and there's more of them. So it doesn't have any super major implications. There isn't a lot going on narratively with the campaign other than you just find the pyramid in the moon and you encounter the Witness. It's important for the kind of ending climax, but you could take Shadowkeep out of the equation and it really wouldn't change much. After that, I'm going to give the gameplay a 5 out of 10. The moon is just such a boring location, especially considering it was already in Destiny 1. So exploring the moon, you don't really get a lot of like interesting stuff happening. It's just kind of more Destiny 2. And that's fine. Destiny 2 is a fun game, but I just don't think there is anything interesting with the gameplay beyond it just being more Destiny on the moon. As for the gimmick, I'm giving this one a 2 out of 10. The Dreambane armor is one of the worst decisions that they've ever made. I genuinely don't know why it was even, like, conceptualized. The idea of having to wear a specific set of armor to be able to defeat certain enemies is really what kills this DLC for me, because everything else is perfectly fine, but just that one gimmick really ruins this DLC. And after that, the loot, I'm also going to give a 5 out of 10. There's a few exotics like the Deathbringer that are very memorable from this DLC, but for the most part, the Dreambane armor kind of clogs up the loot pool because you're forced to use it the whole DLC. So it kind of just became void that anything even existed, and now that Shadowkeep's not in the game, you don't need the Dreambane armor, so what's even the point? And that gives it an overall score of 18 points. After that, and it really pains me to say this, is going to be the Edge of Fate. I'm going to give this one a story and narrative of a 3 out of 10. This is one of the most confusing narratives I've ever seen in a video game. There is genuinely so much happening in this game's story here in the Edge of Fate. You have the introduction of not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 major characters, 2 major villains, and so many new gimmicks and ideas brought into the fray that just do not work on a conceptual level. The introduction of Lodi, as well as the Drifter's former partner who works for the Nine, already take up a lot of screen time with having 2 major characters, but then you of course introduce the Aeonians as a whole new race of allies, with one of them being very important to the integral narrative of the game. And on top of that, you introduce 2 villains, one being the major fallen villain, and then later on Dredgen Bale, who becomes the big villain of the final DLC in Destiny 2. You also have, of course, the multiple members of the Nine that clog up a lot of screen time and investigating the death of one, and though there are a lot of very pretty things to look at, especially in the final mission of this campaign, I generally think that the story and narrative is the biggest weak point of the Edge of Fate. After that, I'm going to give the gameplay a 6 out of 10. I enjoy exploring Kepler. I think it's a very fun planet to explore and look at. The new enemy design with some of the new Fallen, as well as them using Strand, is a lot of fun to kind of experiment with. And in general, I do think this has some very fun gameplay, all things considered. After that, I'm going to give the gimmick a 5 out of 10. You have the Matter Spark gimmick, as well as the, force movement gimmick, and I enjoy both of those. I think there's a lot of fun puzzle solving you can do with both of them, but I do think they're mostly generic kind of throwaway ideas that they had kind of in the back of the tank for a while, and they decided, you know what, let's just do it for this DLC. So I'm going to give them a 5 out of 10 on that. And as for the loot, as someone who just played through the Edge of Fate for the first time after kind of leaving Destiny in the past in 2024, I can give the loot safely a 5 out of 10 in this DLC. There's not really any weapons in the Edge of Fate that I found particularly interesting, and the armor was never really useful for me, so I'm just going to give it a 5 out of 10 in the loot, which gives it an overall score of 19 points. After that, and you all are probably shocked that it even made it this far, but we are still in the C tier category, so it's fair enough in my opinion, is going to be Lightfall. Now, Lightfall got saved drastically by 2 different categories that we'll get to in a second, but starting off with the story and narrative is going to be a 3 out of 10. This is where Lightfall takes its massive punch to the gut. The Lightfall story narrative is one of the biggest blunders that Bungie has ever done, because it was intended to be the last DLC, and then at the last minute they kind of shifted gears to make this a filler DLC right before the final Shape DLC ended the Destiny 2 story. So, for story and narrative, the 3 out of 10 feels very good here. You of course have the Witness trying to get his hands on the Veil. It's not really explained what the Veil is very well. Osiris, as well as the new characters Rohan and Nimbus, are not very interesting characters, especially considering that Osiris's DLC is one of the worst DLCs in Destiny history, and Rohan and Nimbus do not really add anything new to the story that make them pretty interesting. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. I think exploring Neomuna and just in general the Neptune atmosphere is a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool things that they do with this game's campaign. The Legendary campaign is actually a lot of fun to play through with some friends, and I think Legendary campaigns in general just save a lot of these more newer campaigns from being generally atrocious. On top of that, you do have the addition of Strand that I'll get more into with the gimmick, but just using Strand is also what really saves this DLC and makes its gameplay a lot more fun than it could have been otherwise. And then we get to the gimmick, which I'm also going to give a 6 out of 10, where it once again gets a lot of carrying points. And that is simply because the Strand abilities are a lot of fun. The supers are really unique, the threadlings as well as the shackles are really cool ideas, and of course the grappling hook is just so much fun to use all the time, so I feel like it gets a lot of points in the gimmick category, and that's really what saves it. Plus, I just generally do think it is better than the DLCs I've mentioned before, but that's a different debate for a different time. Lastly, though, in the loot category, I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. There are some weapons from this DLC that I genuinely think are a lot of fun and are very memorable. Of course, you have the addition of weapons in the Strand category, which is always a good thing, but weapons like the Quicksilver Storm are very memorable exotic weapons that people still use to this day, so I feel like a 6 out of 10 is pretty good for this one, and that gives it 21 points overall. Alright, after that we enter into the B tier. These are the DLCs that I think are pretty solid. Starting off with the Warmind. This is the second expansion for the original Destiny 2 campaign. I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10 in the narrative. I think there is a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Of course, Anna Bray being the revealed sister of the Exo Stranger, as well as the introduction of the Warmind and its central core processor and how it actually works. You have a lot of fun stuff you do with defeating Zol, the massive worm god, and in general, I just think this is a very fun DLC narratively. As for the gameplay, I'm also going to give it a 6 out of 10. Mars was a very interesting planet to explore. Like I said, the big worm boss fight is a fantastic final boss for this DLC, and the addition of the escalation protocols on the planet of Mars was always one of the most fun public events to get involved in. After that, I'm going to give the gimmick a 4 out of 10. This is where it loses most of its points. I think the problem with this one's gimmick is simply that it's just a spear. Like, you're just throwing a spear for pretty much all of the game. Like, that's kind of it. You have the Rasputin spears. Like, that's the gimmick. There's not much else to it. It's not really all that interesting, and that's kind of all that happens. But it does get a few bonus points simply for the fact that it is very powerful and does actually do something productive. And lastly, for the loot, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. There are so many exotic weapons that are very memorable from this, like the Polaris Lance. And of course, I just generally think that the escalation protocols gave out a lot of very good loot that made this a very memorable exploration and a very memorable DLC, all things considered, which totals it out to an overall score of 22 points. After that is going to be Renegades. This is the Star Wars crossover DLC that I actually just finished about a day ago, and I thought it was overall pretty fun. I'm going to give the story and narrative a 5 out of 10. This is where it really loses most of its points because modern Destiny, at least with Edge of Fate and Renegades, has not been able to tell a very compelling story that is not overly confusing. You have a lot of new ideas and characters and factions get introduced in this DLC once again, and they try and set it up like it's some kind of criminal underworld, but it just overall gets kind of confusing with how much stuff they add in. I enjoy it for the most part. I like the Star Wars inspiration. I think Dredgen Bale is a cool villain for the most part, but I do think that Renegades mostly misses the mark with its story and narrative, especially considering that they never really commit to any of the big ideas that they have on display. After that though, in the gameplay category, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10. I think that the idea of having all of the different locations you can land on, like the Venus, Mars, and Europa outposts that you can land on to do certain missions is cool. It's very well designed to look like Star Wars planets while still having a Destiny feel to it. The addition of the Imperium, as well as the combination of the Imperium with the New Fallen from Edge of Fate, is a very good combination. You have Vex that wear outfits because they're crime lords, which is cool, and it's just in general a very uniquely made DLC in terms of its enemy design. And after that we have the gimmick. I'm also going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I think it is pretty cool that you can go into these levels and you have you flip the coin and then you can do special renegade abilities. I think that is a cool gimmick and it works very well for this game. Of course, not being able to heal because you have these abilities you can do things with, and also the addition of the weapons that have infinite ammo but they have to recharge, I would consider part of the gimmick, and I think that is also a very cool addition that Renegades brings into the Destiny universe. And lastly is going to be the loot. I'm going to give this one a 5 out of 10. Playing through this DLC, I just found most of the loot was pretty generic Destiny loot. The weapons that have infinite ammo are not particularly powerful, they're just a cool gimmick to have in the game. And the big thing that you're really looking for by the time you beat Renegades is the fact that you get the Praxic Blade, which is just the lightsaber. That's kind of the main point of the DLC at the end of the day. So that totals it to an overall score of 24. After that is going to be Beyond Light to round out the B tier. I'm going to give this one a story and narrative of a 7 out of 10. I think the narrative is really strong here. The introduction of the darkness, the return of the Exo Stranger, and how Drifter and Eris tie into those two things. It sets up a lot for the Destiny universe, the way that the Guardian is forced to use the darkness. It's just a very cool thing that happens, and it's very well framed in a way that introduces us to the darkness being the final big villain of the saga. And of course, the Witness gets his first real speaking role in this section of the game. So, great story, it's a lot of fun. As for the gameplay, I'm also going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I really just enjoy going through Europa. It's such a well-designed planet. It looks really good. I forgot to mention that Varix is also back, and he's really cool. The bounty system, where you have hunts where you hunt down certain enemies, is really cool and really well-designed. I like the general narrative flow, and I just generally think the gameplay is pretty stellar on Europa. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. I think that the gimmick of this DLC being the darkness abilities, the stasis abilities, is really cool. It's a fun new addition. The way that you upgrade it through different cruxes is a very cool style that separates it very much from the light abilities that you previously already had. And in general, I just think it is a very cool way to introduce a new subclass to the Destiny universe. And as for the loot, I'm also going to give this one a 5 out of 10. It's just still kind of just your generic Destiny 2 loot. There's not a lot going on with the Beyond Light kind of loot system. Of course, you do have a few memorable exotics that save it a lot of points, like the Cloud Strike and the Salvation's Grip being two off the top of my head. But for the most part, I think Beyond Light is a pretty forgettable DLC in terms of the weapons and armor that it brought into the storyline. After that, and moving into the A tier category, is going to be the Red War. Starting off with the story and narrative, this is one of the biggest jumps in quality. I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. I absolutely adore this original game storyline with Gaul taking over the light and having the Guardian not have any light and they have to reconnect with it through a story. It's a very, very well told narrative. I just the only reason it loses 1 point is that I wish you didn't have the light longer so that you could really sit and fester with that feeling that you are powerless. But regardless, I do think it is very well done, it's very well timed, and it is one of the most fun Destiny campaigns that they had ever released. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. Destiny 2's gameplay gets a bit of a gut punch here by losing 3 points, simply for the fact that, like many people complained about when it came out, this is just a continuation of Destiny 1 where people don't have their loot. That's kind of all it is, that's kind of all it was when it came out, and I generally do think that that is the biggest kind of punch that Destiny 2's early game gets, and that's why the gameplay only gets a 7 out of 10. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give this a 6 out of 10. I think the gimmick here is simply that you don't have the light, and the reason it gets a 6 out of 10 instead of like a 10 out of 10, because it's really cool, is just that it doesn't last very long. You basically don't have the light for like 2 missions, and then after that you get it right back. So it's a cool gimmick. I like the idea of Gaul and the way that it works, but I just generally think the gimmick does lose a few points there. And as for the loot, I'm going to give this one a 6 out of 10. I consider it generally above average. I think Destiny 2 introduced a better looting system overall than Destiny 1 had on its launch. But I do think it once again gets a bit of a punch just for the fact that it felt more like Destiny 1 again. Alright, after that is going to be the Rise of Iron from Destiny 1. For story and narrative, I'm going to give this a 9 out of 10. It is a very emotionally gripping campaign. Lord Saladin is really cool. I enjoy a lot of what they do with this game's campaign and bringing in the Iron Lords. And of course, Siva is a very, very interesting mechanic that is very well introduced into the Destiny world. For gameplay, I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10. The big hit to the gameplay for me is that the Plague Lands is literally just red version of the Cosmodrome. There's no new location, there's no new exploration. It is just a red version of a place we already have. Though the gameplay is very cool, I do enjoy exploring the Siva-infested laboratories and uncovering new stuff in that regard. So there is a lot to like about it, but it is overall just a bit of a hit with the 2-point loss there. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give this one a 7 out of 10. Like I said, the introduction of Siva is a really, really cool thing. I think Siva is a very interesting dynamic for the game, and it just generally gives the gimmick a lot of points. And as for the loot, I'm also going to give it a 7 out of 10. This is when Destiny 1 kind of peaked with its looting ability for the most part, though I do think the Taken King had more memorable weapons, including the addition of swords, but Rise of Iron did still have some great loot, and generally was what carried Destiny to be its ending for Destiny 2 to have a good launch. Or, I guess it was a divisive launch, but to have a good life and fruition, which gives the Rise of Iron an overall score of 31 points. And rounding out the A tier before we get into the S tier, top 3, top of the notch stuff, is going to be the Witch Queen. I'm going to give the story and narrative here an 8 out of 10. I think that the story is pretty good. Savathun is a fun villain. I enjoy what they do with Savathun throughout the DLC. You of course have the introduction of the Hive using the light, which is one of the most fascinating additions to the game's storyline. And it just continues to blur the line between the light and the dark in a way that feels very, very fresh. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give it also an 8 out of 10. The gameplay here is pretty memorable. Of course, exploring through Savathun's throne world is one of the prettiest looking locations and the most well-designed architecturally locations in Destiny 2. I enjoy the Hive having the light. I think the using like supers and stuff like that is really cool, and it just in general has a lot of fun gameplay elements. Of course, the big one being the introduction of the Legendary campaign, which really sets the Witch Queen apart from other DLCs in Destiny 2. As for the gimmick, of course, I've touched on it. The Hive used the light. I'm going to give this one an 8 out of 10, borderline a 9 out of 10. I really considered it, but for the most part, the Hive using the light is such a massive change for the Destiny universe and has very big implications. Obviously, the gimmick of having to crush the ghosts and them actually using supers against you is really cool, and I just generally think the gimmick is very memorable. As for the loot, I'm also going to give this one an 8 out of 10. I remember the Witch Queen just being the big loot overhaul, especially with the legendary campaign giving you exotics after you complete it. I think it is generally one of the most memorable in terms of its loot that Destiny 2 has to offer, which gives an overall score of 32 points. And that leads us into the top 3. If you all have enjoyed this video, leave your rankings of the Destiny campaigns in the description. I'd love to hear what you all think, and if you disagree with any of my points, let's have a civilized discussion about it, because I love talking about stuff. Please leave a like and subscribe, that also helps out the channel, and without further ado, let's talk about the top 3. The S tier, upper echelon Destiny DLCs, starting off with the Taken King. For story and narrative, I'm going to give this one a 10 out of 10. This story is absolutely gripping from start to finish. I love the Taken King. I love the way that Oryx is introduced into the world. I love the way that he wants revenge for Crota. I generally think that the narrative and the storyline of the Taken King is some of the best writing that Destiny has ever done. And it might be a bit of nostalgia blinding, but I genuinely do think that this is one of the best storylines that Destiny has ever had. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. The big issue with the gameplay in the Taken King is simply that Destiny 1 is an old game now, and it does feel like an old game. Going back to play Destiny 1 after playing Destiny 2 does genuinely feel like a massive dip in quality, which, like I said, it makes sense considering that Destiny 1 was an Xbox 360 and PS3 game, but it is just unfortunate that it is such a big dip in quality, and that really does hurt the gameplay overall. Though, of course, with the gimmick, you have an 8 out of 10 here because the introduction of the Taken, as well as the introduction of swords, is a really cool gimmick. The Taken are very cool, they're introduced in a very creepy way, and I generally think this is a very strong gimmick that this DLC has with the Taken. Lastly, the loot, I'm also going to give an 8 out of 10 to. The introduction of swords is pretty fantastic, the Taken weapons are all really cool, and I generally think that the Taken King has some of the most memorable loot in the Destiny saga. I forgot to mention with the story and gameplay, I also just think the Dreadnought is a very, very cool location. It's so open, it's so vast, and it is so fun to explore, and some of the most cinematic moments in Destiny history happen within that ship. And that gives the Taken King an overall score of a 34 points. At number 2 is going to be the Final Shape, the final DLC in Destiny 2. I'm going to give the story and narrative a 9 out of 10. It is such a cinematic and conclusive way to end the Destiny saga. I think that the mission where you beat the Witness for the first time, or the 12-player one, not the raid one, but the one where you can play with a bunch of people, I think that is one of the most fun missions that they have ever designed. It's one of the most unique missions they've ever designed, and I generally think that the story and narrative of the Final Shape is one of the most gripping narratives that they've ever told. I love all of it. I think Iconoclasm is also a very fantastic mission, and just in general, this is a very solid narrative. As for the gameplay, I'm also going to give this a 9 out of 10. The Pale Heart is a very, very unique location in the Destiny universe. It is not like any other location they've ever designed. I generally enjoy running through it and exploring and looting. Unlocking the Kvostov was a big pain, but it was also a lot of fun. And I just generally think the gameplay is some of the most solid gameplay in Destiny history. Which leads us into the gimmick, or the prismatic, the addition of the prismatic to the game, which also is going to get a 9 out of 10. I like how prismatic is very useful, it's very powerful against certain enemies, but the best part about it is that after you unlock it, you actually have to explore the Pale Heart to be able to unlock the new abilities for it. It's very well designed, it's very interesting, and it's very unique to the game itself. And lastly, for the loot, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10, which it just has good loot. Like, it just has very, very solid loot for an overall Destiny expansion. There are very memorable pieces of armor. Of course, the Kvostov is a very memorable exotic that gets added finally back into Destiny 2 through this DLC. You have the sword, the Ergo Sum, that is like elemental based on like your role and stuff like that, which is always cool. And in general, I think this is one of the most solid expansions in terms of its loot. And that rounds out the Final Shape to 35 points. And lastly, coming in at number 1, I feel like a lot of people saw this one coming, it's going to be Forsaken. Forsaken is going to get a 10 out of 10 for its story and narrative. The death of Cayde 6 to this day is still very emotional and very well done, and the way that you are hunting down Uldren Sov and you have to hunt down all of his different, like, fallen companions or scorned companions is really cool. I generally think that the story and narrative is very, very compelling in the Forsaken campaign, and of course Riven in his introduction is very fascinating and very creepy. As for the gameplay, I'm going to give this a 10 out of 10. I mean, the Tangled Shore is already a very cool location and one of the most fun to explore, but then you also have the Ascendant Plane get introduced once you make it to the Dreaming City, and the Dreaming City to this day remains probably one of the most beautiful locations in gaming history to explore. On top of that, the gameplay is also just really fun. It's just fun. Like they added a lot of new stuff for subclasses. It's fun to explore the new planets, and there's just a lot to do in this campaign. As for the gimmick, I'm going to give this one a 9 out of 10. The Forsaken gimmick is just like all of the new stuff, the Ascendant Plane, the Dreaming City. Of course, the introduction of the Scorn is a gimmick, and I just generally think that it all works very well in the campaign's favor to be very memorable. And after that is going to be the loot. Forsaken has some of the most memorable loot in Destiny history. Items like the Ace of Spades, for example, one of the most iconic weapons in Destiny. It's just a unforgettable campaign. It is an unforgettable time to be a Destiny fan back in the Forsaken era, and I'm going to give the loot a 9 out of 10, rounding Forsaken out to an overall of a 38 points. And that's going to do it. That is every single Destiny campaign ranked from the worst to best. If you all enjoyed using the points system, please let me know in the comments. I'm wondering if I want to use that system again for a movie video that I'm working on or some other videos I've been working on. Overall, though, I had a lot of fun making this list. You probably don't agree with me. A lot of this does have to do with just how much I remember, because like I said, some of these DLCs are completely unplayable at this point. The loot category is also a bit of a mixed bag, but I feel like this is generally the order I put it in anyways, even if the loot category wasn't there. So overall, I think my list is pretty good. I think this is how it will stay until the end of time, until Destiny 3 comes about and maybe changes things. But overall, I hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you on the next one, and peace out. Rest in peace, Destiny.